Hi there, you're watching the third video in my series, AI Literacy for College Students. In this series of videos, I present information about artificially intelligent text generators to help students learn how these tools work, what their limitations are, and how they can be incorporated into their research and writing process. In the first video, I explained how artificially intelligent text generators write. I explained how they extract information about the statistical relationships between words from their training data. I also highlighted how it can be problematic to use these tools for your research or writing for school, since their design gives them a tendency to make up fake facts and sources. In the second video, I continued my discussion of the possible dangers of using AI text generators by discussing how these tools reflect the dominant ideologies that they are exposed to from their training data. In this third video in my series, I will provide a demonstration of how I used AI text generators to write a literature review, similar to the one I assign my students in one of my writing classes. My name is Nick Subtarellu. I'm a writing teacher and scholar who studies language and its role in our society. These videos draw on my experience as a researcher and as a writing teacher. As I mentioned before, this video will provide a practical example of how someone could use AI tools when completing a writing assignment for school. I will demonstrate how I used artificially intelligent text generators to help me write a literature review similar to one I assigned to my students. I have included a link to the final version of this literature review in the video notes. You can go view it by clicking on that link. Before I get into that demonstration, I want to address the issue of whether students are even allowed to use these tools. In other words, I want to talk about your teacher's policies and expectations regarding artificial intelligence. In some cases, your instructor may tell you not to use these tools at all. Obviously, it's best not to use them in that situation. But even if your teacher does allow you to use these tools to help you write or research, it's extremely unlikely that they would permit any or all uses. Hopefully, your teacher will communicate what their expectations regarding the use of AI tools are. But I know that a lot of students feel really confused about what teachers' expectations are with respect to these tools. In part, this confusion stems from the fact that AI text generators have not been around long enough for us to reach a clear consensus on whether or how it would be appropriate for students to use these tools. In light of this lack of consensus, I think it can be informative for students to explore the range of views that their teachers have about AI text generators. To that end, I want to talk about an article written by Alex Barrett and Austin Pack. The article was published in December 2023. In it, the authors report on a survey of students and teachers at institutions of higher education. They collected surveys from 68 instructors at a variety of different universities and colleges, mostly in the United States and China. It's worth noting that the authors did not collect survey data from a representative sample. The authors recruited the respondents to their survey from their existing social networks. Therefore, the survey respondents are likely to be similar in many ways to these authors. For example, the authors are interested in technology in education, and so I think we can expect that the survey respondents probably are also interested in similar topics, and they may be more likely to embrace ChatGPT or other AI text generators than other faculty may. Nonetheless, I think the data reveals some informative trends that I would like to discuss now. In their survey, the researchers, Barrett and Pack, asked college instructors how acceptable it would be for students to use ChatGPT in several different ways. The survey contained a few different scenarios and asked about different parts of the writing process. The first stage of the writing process that the researchers asked about was the brainstorming phase. They asked their survey respondents if it was acceptable for a student to use ChatGPT to help them brainstorm topics for a school essay. So, the prompt that the student gives to ChatGPT would be this: please brainstorm some ideas for an essay on the topic of urban challenges and global warming. There are different ways to use ChatGPT's output, so the researchers asked survey respondents about different uses. The researchers asked survey takers if it would be acceptable for the student to just use what ChatGPT wrote as a model for their own writing later. In this scenario, the student would not hand in what ChatGPT wrote to their teacher. And as you can see in my graphic here on the screen, most of the teachers agreed that that use would be acceptable. What if a student wanted to hand in what ChatGPT wrote to their teacher? For example, let's imagine that their teacher required a written topic proposal before the student could begin doing their research. There's no clear consensus among the survey takers about whether this is appropriate. But many of the teachers agreed that it would be acceptable for the student to submit this proposed topic if the student disclosed their use of an AI text generator. There was a clear consensus among the faculty survey takers that it was not acceptable if the student did not disclose their use. This is an important point. In many cases, the teachers who responded to this survey are more accepting of students using AI when the students disclose it. The next phase in the writing process was the outlining phase. The researchers, Barrett and Pack, asked their survey takers to consider a student who generates an outline by telling ChatGPT the following: write an outline of a 5-paragraph essay on the topic of urban challenges and global warming. There are different ways that the student could use the outline that ChatGPT wrote. Let's imagine first that the student simply used ChatGPT's outline as a model, but ultimately wrote their own outline. There was no consensus among the teachers who took this survey about whether that would be appropriate. The teacher showed greater agreement about whether it was acceptable for a student to hand in an outline produced by ChatGPT. A majority of the teachers did not think it was acceptable for a student to hand in an outline written by ChatGPT, even if the student acknowledged that they had used ChatGPT to write it. And there's a clear consensus among the teachers who took this survey that it's not appropriate for the student to hand in an outline written by ChatGPT if they don't acknowledge their use of artificial intelligence. So again, it can be very important that you disclose your use of these tools if you don't wish to cross an ethical line with your teachers. The final stage I want to talk about is the writing stage. The researchers, Barrett and Pack, again gave their survey takers an example prompt that a student might give to ChatGPT to help them with their schoolwork. Here was the prompt for the writing stage. Write a 5-paragraph essay on the topic of urban challenges and global warming. The teachers who took this survey were divided in their opinions about whether it's acceptable for a student to use this prompt to have ChatGPT generate an example essay. Half of the teachers said they thought it would be appropriate for the student to use an essay written by ChatGPT as a model, but the other half said it would not be, or they were unsure. However, most teachers who took the survey stated that it was not appropriate for a student to ask ChatGPT to generate an essay and then hand in what it wrote, even if the student acknowledged it. And if the student did not acknowledge that the essay was generated by ChatGPT, the teachers who took this survey are nearly unanimous that that would be inappropriate. So here are my takeaways from Barrett and Pack's survey results. First, students will likely encounter teachers with different attitudes and policies regarding artificially intelligent text generators. If you don't know what your teacher's expectations are regarding artificially intelligent text generators, then it would be a good idea to ask them before you use one of these tools in their classes. Second, most teachers do not want students to hand in texts written by AI text generators. They are more likely to find it acceptable if students use AI text generators to create examples that will help them write their own essays or outlines. Most teachers do not want to read and grade something that an AI text generator wrote. Finally, students should always disclose their use of AI when writing for school. Teachers tend to find it more acceptable for them to use these tools if the student acknowledges it up front. With these lessons in mind, I want to walk you through an example of how I used artificially intelligent text generators to help me write an essay as if I were a student in one of my own classes. In one of my writing classes, I asked my students to write a literature review. Their literature review must be focused on a problem facing community colleges or community college students. I require them to cite at least 5 peer-reviewed research articles in their essays. Therefore, the students have to find at least 5 different scholarly sources using a scholarly database called Education Collection. They then must read and take notes on their sources. Finally, they have to use what they learned to craft a written argument in which they cite and discuss the information they found in their scholarly sources. As I already mentioned, I've made my example literature review available online, and you can find a link to it in the video notes. For the rest of this video, I will describe how I wrote my example literature review and what I learned about artificially intelligent text generators from this process. I will focus specifically on how I tried to use these text generators in the process of writing my essay. My process can be broken down into 5 stages. 1. Planning and conceptualizing. 2. Locating, reading, and taking notes on my sources. 3. Outlining my essay. 4. Drafting the essay. And finally, 5. Revising the essay. It's important to note that, for the sake of simplicity, I will discuss each of these stages as if they happened one before the other in a linear fashion. I present my process as linear to help convey the information in an organized and comprehensible fashion. Before I tell you more about how I wrote my literature review, I want to note that it's not my intention to endorse any of the AI text generators that I used. I used several of them because I wanted to understand the available tools better. It's also important to note that I only used the free versions. I did not pay for the premium versions of any of these tools. There may be more useful features available in these premium versions, but it's not my intention to review these different products. The first stage of my process was the planning and conceptualizing stage. I began the research process by trying to develop a clearer idea about my research topic. Specifically, I hoped to come up with a research question and thesis statement that could better guide my research and writing. At this stage, I hadn't yet clarified exactly what I wanted to write about, even though I had come up with a general topic. In order to further clarify my ideas, I used artificially intelligent text generators to help me brainstorm. I asked a few different text generators to provide me with ideas, outlines, example essays, or suggested sources that were related to my topic. For example, I wrote the following to Google Gemini. I have to write a literature review for class. The topic is a problem facing community colleges. I want to write about problems with generative artificial intelligence, like ChatGPT, in writing classes. I read through the output from Google Gemini and from the other artificially intelligent text generators. I also read some of the sources that they suggested. In addition, during this time, I wrote memos to myself documenting my thoughts on the topic, and elaborating on some of the ideas that I got from the artificially intelligent text generators. After a few hours of brainstorming, reading, and writing notes and memos to myself, I finally came up with a research question that could guide my research process. How can writing instructors at community colleges address students' use of AI text generators in ways that ensure that their students continue to develop literacy and critical thinking skills? After I had a clear idea about what I hoped to write about, I started the next stage in my process: locating, reading, and taking notes on sources. Once I had a research question, I felt more confident about searching for sources since my question helped me to formulate search terms. I did not find many useful recommendations for sources from the text generators. In fact, only one of the articles that I eventually cited in my paper came from a text generator. One of the problems was that some of these tools have a tendency to create texts that refer to fake sources. I discussed this in my first video when I talked about how artificially intelligent text generators are not designed to produce factual information. They're simply designed to mimic human writing. This mimicry means that when I asked some of these tools to cite scholarly sources, they just made up fake ones for me. I don't think that these tools are currently going to be very useful when it comes to finding peer-reviewed scholarly sources. Many of these sources are not publicly available on the internet, and so a simple search of the internet will not necessarily help, because you have to have a subscription to access these publications. Therefore, you need to use a specialty academic database. At this time, I'm not aware of any AI text generators that are connected to these databases and can search them for you. I expect that will change in the future, but for now, I recommend searching for sources using databases like the ones students in my class have to use, ProQuest's education collection. I searched ProQuest's education collection database and found 10 articles that looked relevant and interesting to me. I chose to read and take notes on more articles than would be necessary for my assignment because I knew it would turn out that some of these articles would be irrelevant or repetitive, meaning some of the articles would say the same things. Over the course of several days, I read the articles and took notes on them. I didn't use AI tools much during this time, but they were relevant in a couple of ways. In one case, I used a text generator called Perplexity to help me understand something I read. I was reading an article by a scholar named Antonio Bird. I found the article difficult to read at times, but I thought its ideas were important, so I struggled through. I came across a passage that I wasn't sure I fully understood. Therefore, I asked Perplexity to help me. Here's what I wrote to Perplexity. Here's a quote from a scholarly article I'm reading titled Truth-Telling: Critical Inquiries on LLMs and the Corpus Texts That Train Them. By responding to literary crises with a back-to-basics pedagogy, composition studies has participated in histories of linguistic punishment that have shaped how writers produce, edit, and publish texts. These punishments create the presence of power and ideology in the corpus texts LLMs use for training. Can you help me understand this quotation? After reading Perplexity's explanation, I was more confident that I understood what Bird was trying to say in this article. There was one other way in which these AI tools were relevant at this stage in my process, as I was finding, reading, and taking notes on my sources. Specifically, I knew that I would try to use AI tools to help me draft my literature review. So as I took notes, I made sure to include things in my notes that I might want to include in my prompts later on. For example, in the article by Barrett and Pact that I discussed earlier in this video, I discovered a relevant bit of information. About 90% of the teachers who took their survey reported that they had never discussed AI text generators with their students. That seemed very relevant to my literature review, so I made sure to copy that information into my notes so that later on I could include it in the prompts I created to help AI generate a first draft for me. After I finished reading and taking notes on my sources, I began the next stage of my process, outlining my literature review. At this point, I once again asked AI text generators to suggest an outline for my paper, but now I had more information about how I wanted to structure my essay, including a thesis statement. So I was able to provide more specific information for the text generator to help me create an outline. I once again used the artificially intelligent text generator Perplexity. Here is what I wrote to it. I am writing a literature review about how community college educators should address issues related to artificially intelligent text generators like ChatGPT or Perplexity. My thesis statement is artificially intelligent text generators pose a potential threat to the learning and teaching of writing at community colleges and other educational institutions, since students' misuse or over-reliance on these tools can lead to them missing opportunities to develop writing, research, and critical thinking skills. In order to address this problem, educators should guide students in learning to use these tools in an informed and responsible manner. Please create a sample outline I could use to draft this literature review. Notice that my prompt now contains greater information, including notably my tentative thesis statement. This specificity helped me get a more useful outline from Perplexity than the ones I had gotten during the brainstorming phase of my process. I looked closely at what Perplexity produced for me, but ultimately I did not use its outline. When I looked at it, I noticed that it began by discussing the potential benefits of AI text generators. And that's not where I wanted to begin my paper, because for me, that was not the starting point of this discussion. As an educator who is concerned about the use of these tools, I wanted to start by addressing my and other educators' concerns. I felt like Perplexity and the other AI text generators that I used had a tendency to assume that the potential benefits of AI should be the main focus, something I think reflects the attitudes or assumptions about artificial intelligence that can be found in the training data for these tools. I felt like there was a fundamental difference between me and the AI text generators with respect to how optimistic we are about the power of these tools. As a writing teacher, I found myself expressing a great deal more concern and skepticism about the usefulness of these tools. I bring this up because I think it's important for students to be aware of how they might disagree with what they see in the output of an AI text generator, just like I did. Looking for these points of disagreement may help students to clarify how their ideas or opinions are distinct from what many or most people think. Honing in on the ways their views differ from common views, as they are represented by the AI text generator, will help students identify important points to make in their writing. I made notes about my perception and my disagreement with the AI output in my research log. And as I said, in the end, I did not use Perplexity's outline. Instead, I wrote my own, but engaging in this process was still useful because it gave me some insights into what I thought about how this paper should be structured. I kept working on my example to add in detail and especially to incorporate ideas from my sources. The outlining I did made the next stage, generating a first draft, much easier. In order to generate my first draft, I created a set of prompts to give Perplexity. Each of my prompts was designed to instruct Perplexity on how to write one paragraph of my literature review. I spent a couple of hours crafting these 9 different prompts, one for each paragraph. I worked on one paragraph at a time for 2 reasons. First, text generators like Perplexity usually have limits on how many words each of its output texts will be. These tools, or at least the free version of these tools, usually won't write something as long as my literature review in one shot. So I had to break it up in order to produce this long of a paper. Second, I wanted to be able to give detailed instructions about each part of the paper to maximize my control over what I got. In each prompt, I gave Perplexity information about what content I wanted the paragraph to have and what rhetorical function the paragraph would have. Some of the details that I gave to Perplexity included my own reflection writing or things I wrote in my notes. In many cases, I also provided quotations from the sources that I read. I would either cut and paste the abstract from the article or a specific quotation from the article that I thought was important to be discussed in my paper. In addition, I always specified how many words I wanted the output from Perplexity to be. Here I present an example of the prompts that I used. This was the first prompt I used. It was intended to generate my introduction, the first paragraph of my literature review. In this prompt, I provided 2 quotations from my notes. The first quotation was a story I wrote in my notes about how I really appreciated learning to write strong essays as a college student. Those experiences are probably important for understanding my concerns about students using AI to write their essays. The second quotation was the tentative thesis statement that I wrote in my notes. I also gave it some other specific information about what it should write. I told it that this should be an introduction paragraph to a literature review, and I also told it to limit it to only 150 words. So here's what the prompt says. I am writing a literature review to use in the English writing class that I teach. The topic of the literature review is how to teach students about generative artificial intelligence and how to use it ethically and effectively. Here is a story I wrote that I want to use in my introduction paragraph. I have fond memories of taking courses in college where I was encouraged to research and write arguments about how I saw the world. The act of sifting through ideas and facts to try to develop a clear sense of my own position on something appealed to me. I remember having a sense of pride in the essays I wrote and the insights that they represented, even if very few people would ever read them. I saw this process as a clear representation of my own intellectual growth. Fast forward a couple of decades, and I am now a writing instructor at a community college where I have the pleasure of getting to try to create these same experiences for my students. The world has changed in this time, and one of these changes is the introduction of generative AI, a tool that many in my profession see as a threat to the kinds of development that I enjoyed by persisting through the often bewildering process of research and writing. AI, it turns out, might be able to largely bypass this. And here is my thesis statement. Artificially intelligent text generators pose a potential threat to the learning and teaching of writing at community colleges and other educational institutions, since students' misuse or over-reliance on these tools can lead to them missing opportunities to develop writing, research, and critical thinking skills. In order to address this problem, educators should guide students in learning to use these tools in an informed and responsible manner. Use these 2 quotations to write an introduction paragraph of about 150 words. After I gave Perplexity all 9 of these prompts, I took the output from each one and I combined them all together into one first draft of my literature review. The result was that I had a low-quality first draft. While low-quality first draft might sound like a failure, I don't think it really is. Every first draft I write is low quality, and I think that's true for most writers. This time, with the help of Perplexity, I probably saved some time and emotional turmoil actually getting that first draft on paper. Like most people, when I write a first draft, I spend many hours laboring away in frustration trying to craft each sentence. I bypassed some of that struggle with the help of Perplexity. S. Scott Graham, a scholar of writing studies, argues that writing educators should help students develop more robust and recursive revision practices. Graham summarizes research on writing education by suggesting that teachers should help students learn how to continually revise their writing. He points out that one of the biggest struggles that writers face is getting a first draft, even a really bad first draft. Graham then tells us that artificially intelligent text generators are actually quite good at helping us get really bad first drafts. With the help of an AI text generator, I moved quickly from a blank page to a low-quality first draft, and that enabled me to move on to the next stage in my process, revising. The very first thing I did to my first draft was to change the color of the text to red. I wanted a way to remind myself that the text was written by a text generator. Red text then signaled that this was written by a text generator. Anything I wrote myself or changed into my own words, I colored black. As I worked on my revisions, I made many changes to the original draft. In fact, I rewrote almost everything. The next draft of my paper contained very little red text. As I've mentioned before, I have posted my literature review online, and you can read it by following the link in the video notes. You'll see that I've retained the red coloring, and you'll also see that there's very little left. Since I tossed out most of what it wrote, viewers might question whether these tools are really useful. I think it's important to note that I almost always throw out most of my first draft. In fact, I often just start a whole new document when I begin a second draft. Like Perplexity, I also produce low-quality drafts, and I have to rewrite them extensively every time. So I do think there was some time and effort saved in getting a first draft that I could use to help me get to the next, much better draft, but I couldn't simply rely on what Perplexity wrote for me originally. To wrap up this video, I want to share some tips I've come up with based on my experience. I hope these tips will help students who might want to use AI text generators to more effectively and ethically use them when writing and researching for school. My first tip is ask your teacher about their policies for the use of AI for different parts of the writing process. The results from Barrett and Pack's survey I discussed toward the beginning of this video highlight how different teachers have different expectations, and you may need to ask in order to know what your teacher thinks about students using AI. My second tip is this: if you do use AI, always include a statement acknowledging the use of it with your assignment. As I've mentioned before, you can find a link to the example literature review I wrote in the video notes. And if you go to that literature review, you will see that I included a statement acknowledging my use of AI toward the end of the document. Here's what I wrote. Throughout this project, I used artificial intelligence to assist my research and writing. I used several AI text generators when I outlined and conceptualized this paper, including ChatGPT, Google Gemini, and Perplexity. I asked each to suggest an outline and model literature review. I also used a set of 9 carefully engineered prompts to Perplexity in order to generate a first draft of this literature review. My prompts included quotations from my sources as well as from my own research notes, which I used to give Perplexity a better sense of what I hoped to write about. After Perplexity provided an initial draft of each section of the paper, I combined them into one text and extensively edited it. During the editing process, I completely rewrote or replaced most of what Perplexity produced. Text originally produced by Perplexity is presented in red. The resulting text contains only a small portion of sentences or phrases initially produced by the AI text generator. My third tip is this: use custom prompts with text generators to help you get a first draft you can then revise. As I mentioned before, providing as much information as possible to the text generator will help it produce a more useful draft for you. This may include providing relevant quotations from your own notes or from the sources that you read. However, in the end, I don't think you'll be able to simply use what the text generator produces. You'll need to revise and rewrite extensively in order to produce a high-quality research paper. My final tip is this: scrutinize all writing produced by AI text generators. Verify all information and think critically about AI's ideological assumptions. In the first two videos of my series, I discussed some potential dangers of using AI text generators, including that they tend to make up fake facts and fake sources. In addition, they tend to reflect common biases and assumptions that they pick up from their training data. In order to avoid having these limitations of the AI text generator lower the quality of your writing, you need to be vigilant about checking over everything that the AI text generator produces. One way to do this is to make the text that AI wrote red, like I did. This helped me to remain critical of everything that the text generator wrote, and I would recommend students use this strategy or a similar strategy so that they don't lose track of what text came from the AI tool. Thank you for watching the third video in my series on AI literacy for college students. There may be more videos to come in this series as I encounter more topics that are relevant to students trying to use AI in their writing and research. For now, check out the example literature review that I wrote for this series by following the link in the video notes. In addition, if you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel.